2 months ago, we published a short little drifting game on Android. We also have a follow-up game in the workings, but there aren't too many new features yet. There are 2 ways we could handle this game. We could release the game in its current state or develop and polish it further to a point where it's an actually good game and not just a game jam game. Both approaches have their ups and downs, of course, but at first we wanted to go with the first one and just release the game, bring it out, no matter what. In this devlog you will see how that didn't work out and how our to-do list got longer and longer and longer instead of ever getting shorter. We worked way more on this game than intended, but I think the end product is so much better than what we started with. The most obvious things needed to be fixed are the graphics. In a game jam game you can justify bad graphics with simplicity, of course because that's a deliberate design decision and not because you run out of time at all. Currently, the gameplay is pretty boring too. Crashing into all the boxes isn't that fun. We knew the game needed a racing system that'd go perfectly with a drifting game. Finally, the third big thing we wanted to add was a shop, so the players could customize the car. To stay organized, we made a list on Trello, but that list grew quickly, believe me. It was a lot of work, so let's get started.
Do graphics affect gameplay? I think it depends. With Mission Drift, the answer is clearly yes. It is just so much more enjoyable to drive through an interesting looking place than only having red walls on the whole map. I expanded the map to the left to make room for the first biome, which is the desert. There are some cacti, stones and dried out trees. The more south you go, the drier the desert becomes. The other biomes are the ice and the volcano biome. The ice biome has snowy trees, some icicles, igloos and something like that. At the beginning I wasn't quite sure about it, but then we decided to call the biome Frozen Lake. So now the track parts are just little islands on frozen water. There you go, it even makes sense story-wise that you can drift on ice. The fourth biome is the volcano. The whole biome is just black and dark with only some orange spots where the lava from the volcano breaks out. And also some dried out trees and stones for some variety. I personally like the biome the most, but maybe it also doesn't fit the cartoony art style of the game the best. Anyway, I like it so it will stay in there. Every biome has its own racetrack. Hopefully they get harder when the player progresses through the game. It's not an easy task to balance the difficulty of a racetrack because it just depends on the skill of the player. Of course, before the map I had to make all the different assets. Different kind of trees, stones, volcanoes, a lot of stuff. Not all of them made it into the game, for example a small lake in the forest just wouldn't fit. There it was better to do an oasis in the desert. For all the map pieces I split them into 2 parts and give the top part some particle effects. That is one cool thing with Blender, that you can have particle effects with objects. For example, this one has 3, the trees, the stones and the tree trunks. In the particle effect option you can choose how many of each object you want, and of course the seed too. Then you can just cycle through the seeds until you find the one you like. There are a few problems, for example that they hang over the edge or just sometimes overlap with the trees. Sometimes it can also take really long to find the perfect seed, but most of the time I just end up deleting all the overlapping things in the end. Modeling all the assets was really fun, but getting all those particle systems right, well, it was more than just boring at the end.
The game is called Mission Drift, but why? It started out as a small game about the player having a mission to drift. That's why we chose the name. Very original, I know. Just as a reminder from the previous devlog, the system works by checking the angle between the orientation and the velocity of the car. If this angle is bigger than some threshold, in this case it's 60 degrees, it drifts. In simpler terms, if the car slides sideways across the ground, there are skid marks. The player gets points for drifting. After all, that is the whole point of the game, and if they collect a certain number of points, they will earn coins. Those coins can be spent in the shop. Also, the points are multiplied if the player manages to hit a box while drifting, and if the player hits a wall, well, they get no points. There was only one problem. When implementing this system, we didn't read Unity's documentation and just used the vector3.angle function, thinking it'd be fine. Naturally, it wasn't. Unity handles it a bit differently than we thought, and it caused some problems. There was one angle where the drift always stopped and immediately started again. Of course, it didn't take us a month to realize that the function returns a value between -180 and 180 and not, like we assumed, between 0 and 360. Once we converted the number to the 0 to 360 range, the issues disappeared and everything worked.
To start the racing system, we needed a way to find out in which biome the player is currently in. It was pretty easy to do with just a few triggers around the map. When the player drives through one of the triggers into a different biome, a variable on the manager script is changed too. It is also used for different stuff, for example spawning the player in the right biome or setting the color of the drift skid marks. Because there are 4 racetracks in the game, currently you never know when scope creep hits, we had to make 4 different leaderboards. Of course, we wanted to prevent players from cheating in a race, right? And for that we made invisible checkpoints to track the player's progress. They also prevent players from starting the race in the wrong direction. Maybe we will also add a better indication for the direction you have to drive later on. And then there was the problem with crashing in a race. Of course, we do not want players to crash during a race, so it was needed to give some form of negative feedback on a crash. Now if you crash, you get a time penalty of 1 second. Which brings us to the monetization part of this video. If you want to remove your penalty after a race, you can do so by watching an ad. The thought behind this is that if you're skilled enough to not crash during races, probably if you're a more experienced player, you do not need to watch ads. And also if you're not racing competitively for the leaderboards, just playing casually, then you do not have to watch them either and just be fine with a little bit of a slower time. But if you do, you get diamonds too, which then you can spend later in the shop. We wanted to monetize the game and using ads felt like a fair way to do so. And they only appear in parts where the gameplay stops anyway, so hopefully the ads do not bother the players too much.
So far, that is everything we've got to show. The current plan is to finish all existing features and of course get rid of the remaining bugs. Once that is done, hopefully we'll be able to publish a beta version of the game. From there, we will probably add some more features and continue polishing the game. Feedback is always appreciated and we'll try implementing that too. If you can't wait to get your hands on the game, the classic version is already out and you can play it right now. Link is in the description. Thanks for watching and we hope you enjoyed the video.